So, Dr. DiGangi, I really am excited to be talking to you today and to share your work with my audience and to the broader audience out there that follows our work. So, I had first read your book, as many people have, Energy Rising, and I want to get into the book in some detail, but I was really moved by the power of what you wrote, the applicability in the field that I work in as a psychologist and working in gender-specific medicine and men's health in my case. And you had a very interesting background. I know you're a neuropsychologist, and I believe that you did, and I'll ask you a little bit more about this, your residency with Harvard Medical School. It was a joint residency with Boston University Medical
Yes, it
School,
was
and
technically called the Boston Consortium, and it was,
and the
yeah,
VA.
exactly.
So maybe you could just begin by saying a little bit more about what a neuropsychologist does and how you got in, what drew you into that field.
Well, I never in a million years would have guessed that I would have ended up here. I think that's often how a lot of times our lives unfold. So a neuropsychologist is most technically a clinical psychologist with specialized expertise in the brain. So we really look at the brain behavior relationship. The way that I sort of got here was a sort of long and windy road. So my father is actually a psychologist. He's an addiction specialist.
Mm.
And he was always talking about his work. I was always like, as a kid, he's telling stories. And, I think a lot of people who come to trauma and come to addiction have a lot of addiction and trauma in their own histories. So there was a lot of different angles that was playing out in my childhood. I never thought that I could choose to be a psychologist. My father was not territorial about it. It just like, that's what your dad does. You do something else. My mother was a teacher of immigrants, and my brother is significantly disabled. He's cognitively disabled. So in my childhood, I was always, and sort of sounds strange to say, but I knew at a very young age I was sitting with this question: what am I supposed to do about pain? About my father's pain, about my mother's pain, about my brother's pain. And then there was always a big social justice bent in my household. So we're kind of, looking out at the world. So when it became time for me to pick a career, I thought, I'll be a journalist because I like people, I like their stories, I like listening to people. And that became a little bit too impartial, the objectivity in the face of like watching some pretty traumatic events. I said, let me become a little bit more political. So I actually started my career of all places at the White House. So I started my career at the White House. I worked on a couple of US presidential campaigns. I worked in political consulting. And I think a lot of people will resonate with what I'm about to say. I got tired of the politics of politics. So I was still very interested in these issues that were really forming people's lives. And I moved more into the policy work, the organizing work. And then I did a lot of international humanitarian aid, a lot of international relief work. So I was working now in communities all over the globe. So I was working in Chicago, DC, Detroit, Buenos Aires. I was in Abuja and Nigeria, and I did a lot of work in a small country in Africa called Lesotho. And the thing that really struck me that I wasn't really prepared for was I was in all of these wildly different communities. And yes, on the surface, they all looked quite different, but loss always felt like loss. Rage always felt like rage. Hope always felt like hope. And so I became very interested in these, what I now call emotional energies, and how the human brain creates them. And that's when I said, let me kind of get into the scientific study of trauma, of the nervous system. So most academically, my area of expertise is traumatic stress. So anxiety, PTSD, trauma, etc. So here I am.
Fascinating. I didn't realize this till you said that. My original background was in addiction medicine, and some because of my father who
Yeah.
had, trauma and issues that he had to deal with that than I grew up with, of wondering what happened to my father, when it would happen to me, and how I could keep that problem from happening in other people's lives. So, um, I want to hear more about energy rising and just what the nature of that term is, and what I think there was uh, a quote in which you talked about the nature of energy and what that means and why that's important in people's lives, because it impacts everything. It impacts our
Totally.
personal lives with ourselves, our relationship lives with our loved ones, and our work lives. So you could kind of talk about the energy. What is that, and how do you use it in your work?
Absolutely. So when I use the term energy, I think it's great if people want to interpret it metaphorically, but I don't mean it metaphorically. I don't mean it metaphysically. I mean it neuroscientifically. So the only reason I've been able to do my fMRI or EEG research is because of the electrical properties of the brain. So the brain is quite literally an electrical machine. And emotion, one of the things that I think is really kind of a powerful, but at first disorienting paradigm shift is human reality rises on the energy of emotion. So when we ask ourselves the biggest questions of our life, am I a good person? I don't know. How do you feel about it? Have you done enough? I don't know. How do you feel about it? Are you successful enough? Are you influential enough? All of the answers to these questions are mediated by emotion. Even more interesting is things that we think are objective. Time, money, do you have enough time? It depends entirely on my affective state. Do I have enough money? That is incredibly influenced by my emotional relationship with scarcity and abundance and what does enough mean. So I think in order to really change our lives, what tends to happen, and this is kind of, I think the crux of my work is I think the fundamental error that we all make is we look at the level of the situation. Okay, this person's doing this thing that I don't like. Oh, that thing is happening. Oh, this thing is going to happen on Wednesday. You're not going to believe the thing that she did. So it's our lives are situation by situation by situation by situation. But there's actually no power here because the power rises on the energy of emotion. So what I try to get people to do, and I think when they start to really see what I'm saying, it does become a really life-giving shift is like, hold on, the situations are there. But what people make the mistake is they think that the situation causes the emotion. Something bad happened and now I feel bad. Very, very, very often, because of how the brain works, it's the emotional energy that generates the situation. I feel bad, bad things happen. I feel insecure, then I go to a party and nobody, I don't think anybody likes me there. So it's really how to come into an intelligent relationship. I always say the brain is the most powerful machine we will ever own. But it's a machine. So we've got to learn how to operate it wisely. And when we do, I think our lives really open up to us in extraordinary ways.
That's so fascinating. I'm a psychologist and have been working in the field for, almost 50 years now. And I actually heard about your book, it's kind of surprisingly for me, following the psychological literature. I'd heard from a colleague who was actually a client of mine, who is a high-level business executive, and he told me about the book. He'd heard about it because of his business connections, and he said it was published by, I think, Harvard University Review, or one of the
Yes, it was published by Harvard Business Review. So
Business Review,
yeah,
exactly.
so it's a leadership book by the biggest business press in the world. And I think even that was kind of an extraordinary thing. Because I think what people in all communities are really starting to grapple with is this idea that reality really rises on emotion. Leadership is fundamentally an emotional endeavor. When everybody's agreeing with me, when all the things are working, when all the people are listening, this doesn't really life kind of just moves itself. And I hope that we all have plenty of moments when the momentum of life is just really carrying us. But our when we think about our own evolution, our own growth, our own power, so I use these terms very often and I'm happy to explain them. Emotional pain and emotional power. So I really look at what is the brain and how do we transform our experiences of emotional pain? And by pain, I don't mean we're writhing in agony. I quite literally mean any bad feeling, whether it's stress or irritation or anxiety or frustration or upset or hurt feelings, because the circuits in the brain that give rise to your bad feelings, regardless of the millions of words we can call them, are the same circuits in the brain. And emotional power, I don't mean like I'm going to control everybody. That's exactly the opposite of what I mean. I mean, how do I rest in my own wholeness? And when I rest in my own wholeness, I find all the things I want: confidence, creativity, connection, etc. So I think what happens is a lot of times we're all leading our lives, right? How good we're doing it, how satisfied we are is a secondary question, but we're all leading our lives. Our lives do not break down because our problems get too big. Our lives break down because our feelings get too hard. We feel too frustrated. We feel too overwhelmed. We feel too left out. We feel too jealous. I mean, I could go on and on. So something really transformative happens. Something so healing happens when we say, "Huh, interesting. Okay, this is how my nervous system is communicating with me. How can I learn how to harness those difficult feelings so that I become more powerful, more grounded, more confident, etc."
Well, part of what I find extraordinary about your work and what excites me, one is it feels very new. It's not anything that I mean, I think there's some basic things that we all understand who've been in the psychology field for a long time, but there's things that you've developed that for me feel very new and relevant, and also that you put them into terms that I think resonate with a whole lot of people who often don't get connected with this kind of work because it
Mhm.
seems too
Yes,
airy-fairy or it
yes.
seems too, come on, feelings, that's, so for men in particular that I work with, for people that are in the business world, I think that this work is particularly relevant. And I want to ask you, you talk about neuroenergetic codes, and you describe in detail in your book about various codes. And for me, that was particularly uniquely fascinating. And as we get into, I want to hear more. Very, very useful and empowering for people to not only understand what that is, but then how to utilize them. So maybe start with what are, the neuroenergetic codes that you describe, and how do people use them to their benefit in the various aspects that you describe?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing about one of your comments a second ago
Yeah,
is I have been surprised by how many men come to work with me. And I think it's in part because of the well, I think a big part of it has to do with the fact that I have such a strong scientific background and am really explaining things in scientific terms and not, you used a funny term, airy fairy, but I think you're exactly right. And I think there's a lot of roads to Rome. Like I think it's people can find relief in all different ways.
yeah.
But I think there's a lot of people who are high performing, who are high achieving, who whether they're men or women, and they kind of really can get relief from science. And I again think it's a really beautiful thing to have science utilized as a tool for healing. So in terms of the neuroenergetic codes, really, so the energy rising is broken into these 8 neuroenergetic codes. And the neuroenergetic codes are like each one is a little lever or each one is a blueprint for how to work with emotional energy in your life. Now I divided the book into 2 sections. So the first 5 codes, because you know, if I start to get too far afield here, you'll pull me back. But I've worked in every single human relationship I can imagine. So I work with couples, I work with parents, I work in family systems, I work in companies, I work with founders, I've worked in US politics, I've worked in the international labor movement. So I've really kind of been a student of relationships. I can reduce all of the relationship problems on the planet to one singular question. And that is, people will come to me with a variety of different situations, but what they're asking at the core, their core longing is, Dr. DiGangi, how do I get this person's behavior to stop? How do I get this person to be different, to be more motivated, to be softer, to be more respectful, to be more what I mean, fill in the blank, right? But the thing that I love about the brain is it forces us to tell the truth. And that sentence is incomplete. The full expression of the sentence, if you really think about how the brain is creating reality, is how do I get these people to be different, my spouse, my child, my team, so that I don't have to feel feelings I don't want to feel inside of my own body? Because the only problem with my kid not listening to me at its core, because sometimes I say, "Hey, Isaiah, pick up your shoes," and I can tell he doesn't hear me. So it's not that he didn't do what I say. It's in the certain moments when he doesn't do what I say, but I have a different interpretation that leads to a different feeling, and that feeling is he's disrespecting me, and I feel all these things. I feel bad. I feel disrespected. I feel unheard. Okay. So, in order to transform relationships, we've got to start in the power posture. And the power posture is let me think about who I am showing up as in these relationships. So, the first five codes are really to help people master, harness their own emotional energy. And then the last three codes are once I really have a clear sense of what's kind of going on in my own brain and my own body, how do I then really show up powerfully in relationships? I think that we get, I always say relational intelligence is the most sophisticated relationship on the planet. It's the most sophisticated intelligence on the planet. And I would lay odds to dollars that we will be living on Mars before we figure out how to speak nicely to each other on social media. So, this idea of really learning how to come into harmony with other people is extraordinary. It requires a really extraordinary intelligence. But I don't think it's so complicated. I think that it's counterintuitive. And so much of mastering our life, because the brain, let me back up and say this, the brain is a pattern detection machine. So your brain is moving you through your life going apple, 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 fill in the blank. There's a new day, there's a new situation, there's a new comment, there's a new relationship. Your brain is going to predict that it should be an apple. So we can see already in many cases, this is wildly adaptive. Thank God I don't have to process every single shred of information that comes before my consciousness. However, you can also see if you want something different than an apple, that's gonna feel very counterintuitive to a machine that is literally in the business of predicting the same pattern over and over.
Hmm. That's just that little sentence both creates an empowerment that most people didn't know they needed, and it didn't know that if they had it, their lives would be transformed. And I think this has been relevant throughout human history, but I think particularly now, I know, we're living in a very mobile, changing world. I live in California where I'm not in the wildfire
Okay.
zone right now, but I have been. I grew up in Southern California where the fires have been going on. And everything in our world is in massive disruption and change, and maybe at this point, you could speak a little bit to the times that we're living in and the uncertainty and the confusion and the feeling that we don't know what reality is, and it's driving people literally crazy. But what you offer gives for me, and I think for many, something we can hold on to and
Yes.
something we can
Something
use
soothing.
that
Yes.
empowers us at this
Yes.
very difficult and uncertain time we're living in.
Okay, I just got chills. I have so many things to say. So, Why don't we you just asked about the code, so why don't we go to code 4? And code 4 is about how do we work with the energy of uncertainty. So I think what you're describing here is this really aggressive uncertainty. You're sitting in California right now where so much of the state is burning. Facebook, Meta just announced basically a few days ago that they're going to be removing their fact checking. We have a new administration coming in. There's countries that are in the throes of war. So all of these things are just understandably very provocative to the nervous system. Now, one of the things I want to say going into this conversation is like, I don't want anyone to take my word for it. I truly believe that forget my expertise and just run everything I'm saying through your own intelligence. Feel it in your own body and be like, does that make sense or doesn't it? And then take what you think will work for you and leave the rest. So if something I'm saying is too provocative, just drop it. Okay. So what happens with the brain is effectively allergic to uncertainty. This is just in neuroscience and in the field of psychology, as I'm sure you know, we actually study very much what we call uncertainty tolerance. So people have different dispositions for their ability to tolerate uncertainty, but everyone at a certain point finds uncertainty very stressful. Okay? So when the nervous system is like, "Oh my gosh, I'm allergic to all this uncertainty," what is the reaction? Well, the initial reaction until we have conversations like these that I think are very soothing and very empowering, my reaction to uncertainty is to try to create more certainty at the situational level. There it is again. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get on social media and I'm going to tell everybody how it needs to be. I'm going to tell them they're all wrong. And they, okay. Or I'm going to, I think a lot of your listeners will resonate with this. There's a whole host of behaviors that I call the overs. So, I feel uncertain and then I get into the overs. And the overs involve things like overworking, overthinking, overanalyzing, overgiving, overaccommodating, over-delivering, over-rotating. I mean, I could go on and on and on, right? So what I'm trying to do at an unconscious level until we understand what's going on is I feel uncertain and I'm going to try to overdo it in the world based on my behavior to try to create external certainty. The problem with this, and this is not my opinion, this is actually, we have a ton of neuroscientific literature to support this. The best definition I can give you for anxiety is a disturbed relationship with certainty. What I mean is, the more that I aggressively seek certainty, the more I aggressively try to control things, the more anxious I will feel. Okay? This is like if I someone says, "Hey Julia, like buy this thing," and I throw $5 at it and the thing doesn't work. And then I throw $10 and the thing doesn't work. And then I throw $20 at pretty quick, I'm gonna go, hey, actually, this totally doesn't work. It's depleting my resources. I should stop. But until we have conversations like these, Jed, is like we think, oh, I need to overwork more, I need to give more, I need to schedule more, I need to analyze more. But what I'm saying is what's happening to your nervous system is it's getting shredded. Okay. And you already have the evidence because if let's just take overworking. If I overworked, well, then what that should do at the logical level is it should clean up a ton of work so that now I have all this ample space. I'm able to rest. I have all this. Except the more I overwork, it only seems to create more work. Similarly, if overthinking worked, I would say we should do it. I should solve all these problems and then it should just be easy street from here on out. Except the more I overthink, the more huh? If overfunctioning worked, we would all be there by now. Okay. So then there's this question. All right. Well, what is the opposite of uncertainty? And there's a couple of things, but the one I want to talk to you about today is the opposite of uncertainty is identity.
Hmm.
It is who, when the external world will not cooperate, whether it's Meta, whether it's the people on my team, whether it's my spouse, whether it's my kids, who, when the outside world will not cooperate, will I say that I am? Now, why do I actually believe? Because I've watched the evolution of so much of this the change in the world has everything to do, as you well know, with mental health. I've watched the mental health conversation, depending on how you want to look at it, for 20 some years or 40 some years, right? So I actually feel like this is an incredibly optimistic time for us because I think what's going to happen, and I get chills every time I talk about it, is as these external systems of certainty that used to contain our nervous systems, they used to kind of be the scaffolding of reality of consciousness. As they start to crumble, this is going to put pressure on the species. We're all feeling that pressure, but species only evolve under pressure. And what's going to happen is there's going to be an evolution inward. And people are going to come into their own identity, into their own authority, into their own sovereignty like they never have before. And I am here for it.
Whoa. Talk about getting chills. This feels so relevant, obviously, to the times we live in. And it ties in my mind, to some of what you said initially in the beginning of our conversation about your background in addictions and healing, because
Yeah.
that was my background.
Yeah.
And these getting hooked into the, all the things we try to do to bring about certainty in the external world really are like addictions, or are addictions to a way to think that perpetuates the problem that we're trying to solve. And what you're
Oh,
offering breaks us out of that loop that is never ending. And the addictions go more and more until, you get crazy and you do stuff that kills you or gets you locked up. So when you talk,
you're making such a wise point though,
yeah,
because and the brain kind of gets us. And this is why I say we have to be intelligent about its operation because by virtue of it being a pattern detector, we're all addicts in a way. And what are we most fundamentally addicted to? To what you just said, to our own way of thinking.
right.
And so we'll be like, no, it has to be like this. No, okay, it's causing all this tension in my marriage. It's causing all this violence and I don't mean physical, but just like this bad, violent, emotionally terrible feeling. And we think, okay, I'm just gonna do more, I'm gonna do more, I'm gonna do more, even though at the logical level, there's diminishing returns. So we've got to really understand how the brain is creating reality before we can then figure out how to change it into something more satisfying.
Well, I want to ask you in terms of your own personal life,
Yeah.
because so often, we read something, we hear an expert, and it all sounds, for me, really good, really interesting. I can see how to apply it, but you wonder, how do they actually apply it in their own lives?
Oh,
how did
Jed,
they?
just do as I say, not as I do, man. Come on.
Exactly. But what I
Um,
know from talking to you, and just the little we've begun to talk, is that you wouldn't have gotten to this place in your professional work and in your life if you didn't listen to your own advice to some degree. We're not very perfect, but could you share a little bit about kind of how you actually use the codes in your day-to-day life?
oh God, yeah. I mean, yeah. Like, let me just orient because there's so much I think we here. I mean, you know, I think part of the reason Energy Rising has been so successful is because I I walk the work with it. It's not just like, well, I'm this expert and do everything that I say. And I no, it's like the book came to me and absolutely because of my work and my research, but all the things that I myself have lived through. So I'll give a simple example and then I'm happy to like go on, but
Yep.
I'll start here. So I have two kids, and one of my children, he's one of what we would call a really big feeling kid, and he's wonderful and beautiful, and but he has sometimes he gets dysregulated, and when he gets dysregulated, it's pretty painful in the house. He really does not like to be controlled, and I know none of us like to be controlled, but we've started to realize, like, with him, it's almost next level. It's like, so what he will do is he will not put on his clothes the right way. So, for example, yesterday he went to school with his pants backwards and the pockets hanging out. Now, earlier in his life, and he's not that old, I would say you got to fix your pants. You can't go in the world like this. Take off your pants, fix your okay. And this would oftentimes lead to just like mortal combat. So I had to really think, why is it actually important to me? What's happening inside of my own consciousness? And if I'm really honest with you, which I will be here, I had two main fears. That people would think that I was somehow a bad mother, that I would be humiliated, or they would think I was unworthy, or they would think that I didn't care about my kids, or they would think that I wasn't good enough. And then I think even bigger than that was my fear for him. Like, what will other people like? Are they gonna make fun of him? Are they gonna da 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 da? And what I had to really do is think, okay, I have had a lot of conversations with him. And I have said, like, hey, do you want to put your pants on backwards? Do you and he has said without deviation, this is what I want to do, mama. Like, I'm okay. And so I've had to say, I have got to regulate myself and allow him the agency and the freedom and the sovereignty to be who he is developing to be. And so I think a lot of times, like the the command and control in our households, the command and control in our politics is actually coming from a place of fear. If I don't understand how to face my own fears at the deepest level, I'm just like a loose cannon out there. And so I also really believe that I want to go back to this idea that the brain is a pattern detector. So the brain is not actually going apple, 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 apple. So I said the brain is a pattern detector, and I said reality rises on the energy of emotion. So, really, how your brain is constructing consciousness is we all have these core emotional codes. Maybe we have, let's just say we have one on the power side, like things tend to work out for me, but we all have one on the pain side. And it's going to be some version of things don't work out for me. I'm not good enough. Nobody listens to me. I can't get what I want. That's a big one. People feel okay. So what's happening when we are not in control of our emotional energy, when we're not in touch, is that pattern is like nobody listens to me. Nobody listens to me. Nobody listens to me. And then my husband comes home from work and he instead of coming to greet me immediately, he's I see him in the family room on his phone. And from the posture that my emotional system is already in, I'm like, "See? Nobody listens to me." And then from that emotional posture, I create a situation. I make a dig at him. I'm passive aggressive, right? So what I have learned to do, and it does, it's like one of the things that, depending on my mood, either tickles me or frustrates me, is if I'm a little bit out of shape and I want to get into shape, we're just like, okay, you just go to the gym. You go to the gym a reasonable amount of time, 3 days, 4 days a week, and you can only lift 10 pounds. You try to lift 15. And when you're trying to lift the 15, like you're gonna shake a little bit. It's good, but like that's actually gonna be satisfying because that's the clearest evidence that you're strengthening the physical system. The exact same thing is it's so simple. The exact same thing is true on the emotional side. Is we just have to start to say, I'm going to work against this pattern. And there's all kinds of different ways that we can work against the pattern. So sometimes the emotional energy just needs to be released. It's like you ate something bad, you got food poisoning. Sometimes you just got to like get it out. You got to vomit it. You got to purge it. So the other day, this was 2 days ago. I'm a big walker. I like to walk, Jen. So I went on a walk and I was like, I feel sad. And of course, my mind's like, well, this is why you feel sad, and that's why you feel sad. I'm like, what can we do? I was like, hold on. And I just walked and I cried. And I cried. I mean, maybe I cried for 5 minutes. Like I was just like, but that energy just moves. And when that emotional, because the brain is actually the best way to think about a brain is it is a affective by cognitive machine, which means we think only because we feel. We don't
Mm,
think some days and then feel some days. So we know that attention, memory, processing, all the things are influenced by emotional state. So when I allow the emotional energy to just move, as one example, and I can give other examples of these tools, okay, that energy's move. Guess what? Now my thinking 10 minutes later has changed. Instead of me trying to suppress the energy and suppress the energy and suppress the energy and suppress the energy, and then all day long I'm like triggered by this and annoyed by that and not thinking clearly about this. And that's actually why I titled the book Energy Rising. So the biology is brilliantly designed, right? We take in oxygen, we release waste in the form of CO2. We eat food, we pass it. Every, I think, 27 or 31 days or something like this, our skin cells, they go. The immune system, it sees something toxic in there, it pitches it out. There's something strange about our minds, not the brain, the mind's relationship with emotion. That's what happens is the emotional energy starts to move. This happened to all of us as children. The kid's upset because he didn't get the right color car and he's screaming for 7 minutes and then, you know, he's happy as a clam at high tide. But we then, that bad feeling, push it down, push it down, push it down, push it down. Well, not to be crass, but we become emotionally constipated. So then, instead of having this like clear piping where energy can just flow, somebody cuts me off at a stop sign and I'm pissed off 7 ways until Sunday. So you see, if there's all this emotional residual, all these emotional toxins that we've never really let go, when a new situation comes into our consciousness, we don't have the intelligence to really respond to it in this expansive, creative way.
Oh man. What's very clear to me as we're talking is there's so much more that I want to talk to you about, and I'll ask you
Yeah, I'd be happy to come
toward
back, or we
whether we
get.
can do it again. Yeah, and
Yeah, for sure.
come back, because just I want to make just one resonance with what you just said. As you know, I have children as well, and I have a daughter who is from the beginning. We learn a lot from our children, clearly, and I know I did, and she from the beginning did things differently. Right from the beginning, when I remember going to a swimming pool in the summer when she was just starting to walk, and you're worried about kids at pools, she would come, and as soon as she saw the water and put her toes in, she dove into the water. She'd go right to the bottom, and I'd dive in, pull her out, and she'd and I'd, oh well, she'll never do that again, and she'd smile and giggle, and 10 minutes later, she'd dive in again and go right to the bottom, and I'd have to pull her out. And you think, my God, she's going to die if I don't. Well, what I learned was that one, I did have to get her out and teach her to swim really early so she could not, be at risk. But what I learned is she's always been somebody that does it different. An adventurer. She's now 53 years old and has four children of her own, and I've finally had to accept over many, many years, I need to learn from how she does her world and to eh, deal with my own fears and feelings of what do I need to do in relationship to taking care of the world. So I want to talk to you more. I do want to have you, on again if you're up for that.
Yeah, I'm
But
totally up
I
for it.
before, with the time we have, I want to have you share a little bit about what is coming up for you in 2025 and things that you're doing, how people can reach you and find out and get your book, which shouldn't be too hard to find because it's everywhere, but how people can stay in touch with you, how people can find out more about what you're doing.
Sure. So this year I'm very excited. So for the first time ever, I'm running a year-long program. It's going to be a year-long experience. It's all online where if people are interested in this idea of emotional transformation, I would love for you to check it out. It's called The Age of Energy, and it's really brilliantly designed. So I've given a lot of thought to this. So the program The Age of Energy has three subcomponents. The first program is called Formation, and this is how do we really build our own identity? I talked about how identity is the answer to uncertainty. How do we build an identity rooted in the neuroscience of emotional power? Then, once we kind of nail that down, we move to the second piece, which is called connection. And that is how do I really think about building extraordinary relationships? Even with people, and this is the part I'm really excited for, even with people who are currently very challenging to me, who trigger me, who, I kind of have this like I kind of can get in these loops. And then so once I have my own identity in the neuroscience of emotional power and then the neuroscience of extraordinary relationships, the third and final piece is we really answer the question, what is it that program is called creation? How do I express my own creative leadership in the world? And, I
Mm.
think I have a ton of experience with this from with Energy Rising. I think that's part of the reason the book has done quite well. So if people are interested, they can check out The Age of Energy on my website, or I'm on all of the social media things. So I'm on Instagram at Dr. Julia DiGangi. I'm on LinkedIn at Dr. Julia DiGangi. And then I have a Substack.
Super. Yeah, I've followed you in all the places where I
Oh,
hang
good.
out, and it's not only, and I'll just put in a plug for your ongoing connections on Substack and being on your mailing list, because you continue to put out some very, very interesting, helpful ways in which we can improve our lives at this very challenging time in human history for all of us, I think. So I really encourage people to stay connected with you. I will, post our interview and an article that I'll be writing, so people will hear that from me. But in the meantime, as soon as people get this, they can start connecting with what you're doing, because I know it's super valuable. And
Well, thank you. That means a lot.
anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up for today? In turn, I know there's a lot we will cover in a hopefully a future time
Yeah.
together, but anything for immediately you'd like to wrap up with?
Yeah, let me say this. Hopefully it's not too big of, but I think we've given a good context for this. I actually think that painful emotions, difficult emotions, so frustration, anxiety, fear, doubt, I actually think that this energy that I'm calling emotional pain is the most misunderstood energy on the planet.
Hmm.
I think we think that every time I feel this anxiety, every time I kind of feel this kind of, let's call it, this emotional shake in my nervous system, that means I'm supposed to shut it down. I'm supposed to not take the risk. I'm supposed to not have the conversation. I'm supposed to not build the dream. I truly believe, not just because it's a thought in my head, because I've watched people walk the transformation, that when we have an intelligent handling with the energy of pain, it is the single most transformative, life giving, hopeful, empowering energy on the planet. Now, here's the other piece. We've got to trust our nervous systems. We've got to trust biology. We've got to trust 350 million years of evolution. Like our nervous systems are built to process difficult feelings. So much of our transformation is really quite simple, and it's just getting out of our own way.
Ah, that is so powerful. And in my work as psychologist and marriage and family counselor,
Mm,
I see
yes.
that specific issue playing out over and over again in relationships, particularly in intimate relationships with our spouses, our lovers, and so on, where those feelings come up, and what we interpret them to mean is, oh, there must be something wrong. I can't seem to fix the problem, fix that person. So it must mean I'm with the wrong person. We've grown apart. We must, we need to go our separate ways. We can't be together. Rather than what you're describing is
True.
those quote negative feelings and the interpretations we make of them really are the entree to sometimes the most powerful and in-depth way in which we can understand ourselves and see our relationships in new ways, not only with our spouses, our families, but with other relationships in the world that are problematic or seem
Yeah,
like
so I
we're
mean,
with.
and also, like, we're the holder of those emotional reactions, so everywhere I go, there I am. So
Yeah.
this is why if I keep trying to change my problem at the level of the situation, new marriage, new job, new th those emotional patterns, those emotional codes come with me. So I think you're exactly on the money.
Yeah, well, so thank you so much. This has been delightful, and I definitely want to, have you back again so we can continue our dialogue and in between that. So for now, we'll say goodbye and we'll kind of bring this to a close and, get it out so people can connect with it and look forward to continuing with you in the future.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me, Jed.
Indeed.